Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas.
Presented by Amity University. Ranked amongst the top 3% universities globally.
Skoda Superb. Best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
Nine months of standoff and 9 rounds of disengagement at the border. But it's early days. India's tone is cautious. The pullback has just begun. The standoff is far from over because the tension on the border spilled onto business and diplomacy as well. On Gravitas tonight, as we bring you up to speed with what really is happening on the India-China border, we also look at how the larger confrontation still remains and India cannot let its guard down. Also, why China has begun disengaging now because India has called its bluff. India refused to succumb to Chinese pressure tactics, rallied global support and spoke to China in the language it understands, the language of strength. The result is a compromise, with the Chinese Foreign Ministry first announcing the disengagement. The Indian Defence Minister made a statement in Parliament today. We'll bring you all the updates. Also on the show tonight, it's India versus Twitter. The gloves are off. Twitter refuses to remove posts that India says pose a security threat. We'll tell you where they're heading. In Myanmar, amid the brutal military crackdown, the landing of Chinese planes leads to more questions. Beijing insists it is not supporting the coup, just sending seafood. 2 days after the probe ended, the WHO team members reveal how China denied access to data and samples. Beijing says this probe should now be held in American laboratories. And Canada is turning to India for help. Justin Trudeau called Prime Minister Narendra Modi seeking made-in-India vaccines. We'll tell you more. We begin, as always, with Gravitas Global Headlines.
US President Joe Biden has said the Pentagon will review its strategy towards China for areas including intelligence, technology and Washington's military footprint. Countering China will remain the Pentagon's top priority, as it was during the Trump administration. Speaking to Chinese President Xi Jinping, Joe Biden underscored fundamental concerns about Beijing's coercive and unfair policies in the region. India has asserted that the UN chief's report on ISIS should also cover activities of Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jaish-e-Mohammed that perpetrate attacks from safe haven in Pakistan, saying that the global community must not lose sight of the ease with which the Haqqani network and its supporters, especially the Pakistani authorities, have worked along with terror groups in South Asia. Haitian police fired tear gas on hundreds of protesters marching against President Jovenel Moïse in Port-au-Prince. After his government retired, 3 Supreme Court judges earmarked as his potential replacements. The police fired tear gas and shot in the air to disperse the protesters. Democrats unveiled a new security video during Trump's impeachment trial, which shows the mob of rioters breaking into the Capitol, searching for Vice President Mike Pence and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi as overwhelmed police personnel requested for help.
Nancy! Where are you, Nancy?
South Africa has extended its national state of disaster by another month. It will now continue until the 15th of March, marking a whole year under disaster laws. Prominent women's rights activist Lujain Al-Hathloul has been released from a Saudi prison after spending nearly 3 years behind bars. Hathloul was sentenced to nearly 6 years in prison under broad counter-terrorism laws. She still faces a 5-year travel ban ordered by the court. The head of UK's genetic surveillance programme has said that the coronavirus variant, first found in the Kent region, was likely to sweep the world in all probability, adding that vaccines were so far effective against the variants in the United Kingdom, but that mutations could potentially undermine the shots. Ghana's parliament has been suspended for at least 3 weeks following a surge in COVID-19 cases among parliament members and staff. The Speaker announced the suspension, saying that at least 17 members of Parliament and 151 staffers have tested positive for the coronavirus. Defending champion Sofia Kenin has become the first top 5 casualty at the Australian Open after a comprehensive defeat to Estonia's Kaia Kanepi in the second round. Kanepi overpowered the 4th seed with 22 winner and ruthlessly punished her mistakes to win 6-2, 6-3 in just 64 minutes. Top seed Ashley Barty overcame a late wobble in the second set to beat fellow Australian Daria Gavrilova, while men's second seed cruised to a 6-1, 6-4, 6-2 victory over American qualifier Michael Mamo. The head of the Tokyo Olympics Organizing Committee, Yoshiro Mori, is set to resign over the furor caused by his sexist comments last week. The 82-year-old former Prime Minister had said during a closed-door meeting that women talk too much and that they were too competitive. He had apologized and initially refused to step down. But in the wake of mounting pressure, he is expected to announce his resignation on Friday.
We promised this report to you yesterday, and we know you've been waiting for this. The India-China disengagement. What is happening on the border? The first news flash came yesterday. That's when the Chinese military released a statement. They announced the disengagement. There was no official word from India, only vaguely worded source-based comments. So we decided to wait for the Defence Minister of India to brief the Parliament 24 hours, almost 24 hours later. Now we have the first pictures of this disengagement. Senior commanders from both sides have met. The PLA has moved back some tanks. Indian troops are moving back too. Here is a video released by the Indian side. The tanks have started to move. The movement of soldiers is next, we are told. What does all of this really mean? Are the Chinese troops leaving the border area? Is the 9-month-long standoff now over? The answer is no. This can be called the first phase of disengagement. It is a good start, yes, but it's just the start. A lot more needs to be done. For now, the disengagement process seems limited to the area of Pangong So, or the Pangong Lake. This area resembles the palm of your hand. The Indian and Chinese troops will disengage from the north and south banks here. This is what they call the fingers area. Now let's look at what's happening on the ground. China has its troops on the north bank here. They'll move back behind the border on finger 8. India says that this border is the line of actual control, or the LAC. Chinese soldiers will move behind it. Indian soldiers will move back too. They'll now be stationed at the Dhan Singh Thapa post. This is India's permanent base near finger 3. So Indian and Chinese troops are moving back to their traditional bases. Now both sides will take similar action in the south bank of Pangong So. We don't know the details about that yet, about the disengagement here. But in the fingers area, the land between finger 3 and finger 8 will become a no patrolling zone. This is a temporary measure until both sides can reach an agreement on how to restore patrolling. In both north and south, the border construction carried out after April 2020 will be dismantled. This is how the disengagement is shaping up. It's happening after 9 rounds of talks, and it is significant. Pangong So is a significant and sensitive area. The standoff began last year right here when Indian and Chinese troops clashed. Pangong So is significant for another reason too. In August last year, Indian soldiers captured strategic heights in the South Bank. After this, India also repositioned its troops in the north. They stationed themselves on these heights, and from here, they could monitor Chinese positions. So will India leave these strategic heights too? Is this going to be part of the disengagement? That's something that we do not clearly know yet. Here's what we can tell you. A part of the border dispute seems to have been resolved. What about the rest? India's Defence Minister Rajnath Singh told the Parliament today that some outstanding issues still remain. The Pangong Lake was just one of the multiple friction areas. Chinese troops attempted an intrusion in some other areas as well, like the Gogra post in the Hot Springs area. They're close to each other. Reports say the build-up continues here. They're not moving back just yet. The third friction point is the Galwan Valley, the site where the Chinese troops attacked Indian soldiers last year. 20 Indian soldiers were killed in action. We also have an update about what happened in Galwan. The fourth friction point is the Depsang Plains. This is close to Daulat Beg Oldie base. It's an Indian military base. And let's come back to Galwan, the attack in Galwan. The de-escalation has caught the attention of the world, including Russia. The Russian news agency TASS carried an update. This is about the casualties that China continues to hide from the world. According to TASS, 45 Chinese servicemen have died, in fact, in the border clashes. This report came out yesterday and it was filed from Beijing. As usual, China has said nothing about these numbers. So the border standoff was a trigger. It started a bigger geopolitical battle between India and China. The unprovoked attack on Indian soldiers was a moment of realization. Countering China will take more than just military action. New Delhi must respond to Beijing economically, diplomatically. Even after almost a year, India is maintaining this pressure on China until a full disengagement is achieved on the border. Our next report tells you how.
The clashes in Galwan Valley were a turning point in the India-China relationship. 20 Indian soldiers were killed in action. India responded, not just militarily. India banned more than 200 Chinese apps, cancelled contracts to Chinese companies, and curbed the flow of Chinese cash in the Indian economy. Almost a year after the border standoff began, the restrictions have only become tougher. Chinese imports now face hefty tariffs. This month, import duties were hiked on around 30 products. This measure mostly targets Chinese imports like solar lamps and cells. The levy on their import has been hiked from 5 to 15 and 20%. The import of cell phone charging devices used to be free. They now attract a tariff of 10%. Perhaps what caught China by surprise was the app ban. At the beginning of this year, New Delhi made its ban on 59 Chinese apps permanent. This included apps like TikTok, messaging app WeChat, and Alibaba's UC browser. Beijing sent a message through its state media. The Global Times shot off an editorial calling on Chinese companies to demand a compensation from the Indian government. The editorial asks Chinese tech giants to wage a global battle against India to hurt its global reputation. But it is China that has lost face after the border standoff. World leaders took notice of China's aggressive moves at the border. The United States has been watching the developments from a distance. Washington believes Beijing has been intimidating its neighbors.
We note the ongoing talks between the governments of India and China, and we continue to support direct dialogue and a peaceful resolution of those border disputes. We are concerned by Beijing's pattern of ongoing attempts to intimidate its neighbors. As always, we'll stand with friends, we'll stand with partners, we'll stand with allies to advance our shared prosperity, security, and values in this case, the Indo-Pacific.
From Donald Trump to Joe Biden, America's support for India has remained steady. Other allies extended support to India too. Australia expressed concerns over the movements of the Chinese military. France was the first country to extend military support to India. while Japan has opposed China's unilateral attempt to change the status quo at the LAC. 9 months after the first border skirmishes, India and China are taking steps towards de-escalation in Ladakh. But New Delhi can't lower the guard or ease the restrictions. Any reset in the relationship now is tied to the complete disengagement of Chinese troops at the border. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
So two things are absolutely clear. One, India has not succumbed to Chinese threats. And two, China only understands the language of strength. The border provocation in Galwan was perhaps the most serious military challenge that India has faced in decades. It was unprecedented. In terms of its scale, planning and intent, 20 Indian soldiers were killed in action, 2-0. And the Chinese were fully prepared for further escalation. The pandemic has dented Beijing's global image. Xi Jinping was on a shaky wicket. He desperately needed a geopolitical maneuver to bolster his image. But he underestimated India's strength and resolve. In the past, India acquiesced to China. But now India stands its ground. From Doklam in 2017 to Ladakh in 2020, India has refused to appease China. Unlike its other smaller neighbours, New Delhi drew the red line, made specific preconditions for normalizing ties and used the same policy it has used on Pakistan for decades. If talks and terror cannot go hand in hand, neither can border aggression and business. On the military front, India ensured it will not be caught off guard again. From Galwan to Spangur to Depsang, India ramped up its defences, activated its entire logistics network, matched China's military deployment and secured its frontiers. By October 2020, 40,000 Indian troops were braving the freezing temperatures in eastern Ladakh. And to add to that, India ensured that the Special Frontier Force spearheaded this operation, a force which had Tibetans fighting for India. Thousands of Tibetans have made India their home since the Dalai Lama was forced into exile from China. India has hit China where it hurt the most. Then we come to the economic front. India weaponized its market, curbed the flow of Chinese cash in the Indian economy. It started by amending the FDI policy to curb opportunistic takeovers. In 2019, the fund inflows from Chinese companies in India was $229 million. By September 2020, it had declined by almost 29%, $163 million. Then India carried out what's being called a digital strike. It banned Chinese apps, a move that reduced China's influence on the internet economy. Last we checked, India had banned at least 200 Chinese apps. This provided a model for other countries to do the same, countries like the US and Japan. Then India extended anti-dumping duty on a range of products from China, mostly on antibacterial drugs and Chinese steel. This impacted the price of Chinese products coming to India and adversely affected profits for Chinese manufacturers. India also challenged China's pharma supremacy, began nursing the world. From Afghanistan to Egypt, from South Africa to Brazil, an array of countries received the Made in India vaccine. The Chinese state media was so rattled, it began accusing India of smearing its efforts. One headline is on your screen. India's vaccine diplomacy clearly outfoxed China's wolf warrior diplomacy. And speaking of diplomacy, India also strengthened its security cooperation, primarily through the Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. The Quad, a strategic alliance between the US, Japan, Australia and India, 4 countries. This is to counter China's aggressive military expansionism. This group is set to meet soon. India also held multiple important naval exercises with an eye on China, the Malabar 20 with Quad allies, Slynex 20 with Sri Lanka, the Bongo Sagar exercise with Bangladesh, the Jimex 20 with Japan. Xi Jinping hoped that he could simply wear India down. But India outsmarted and isolated China on all these fronts, military, economic and diplomatic. It understood the gap between China's words and China's actions and kept the pressure on for full disengagement. Simply put, India has called China's bluff and dealt with Beijing in the only language that it understands, the language of strength. Let's shift to Myanmar. It's been 12 days since the coup and our fears are coming true. China has entered the picture. Chinese planes have landed in Myanmar. The Myanmar army says the planes carry only goods. The protesters say they're laden with arms and carry technicians from China. Thousands of people gathered outside the Chinese embassy to register their protest, armed with megaphones and placards. One banner read, "China, you'll be the culprit if we lose our freedom of speech." Another said, "Stop sucking the blood of the country by supporting a dictator." So what exactly is China up to? How much influence does Beijing wield in Myanmar? And how exactly is the world responding to all of this? Here's a report.
China! Shame on you! China! Shame on you! China! Shame on you! China! Shame on you!
The protests in Myanmar have reached the Chinese embassy. Women, men and children, they're all accusing Beijing of supporting the military junta.
We are upset we can't celebrate our Lunar New Year. We are protesting in front of the Chinese embassy instead of celebrating our New Year at home. I want to tell the Chinese government, please stay away from Myanmar, and shame on you, China.
I'm protesting in front of the Chinese embassy because the Chinese regime is supporting the Myanmar military government. I want to ask China not to support the army generals.
The protests have escalated ever since news emerged that Chinese planes landed in Yangon. Reports indicate the planes carried technicians and kits that will help the army firewall social media. But the Chinese embassy says the planes were only carrying seafood.
There are false news and rumors about China on the issue of Myanmar. Please do not believe these untrue claims easily.
China's claims do not have many takers in Myanmar. After all, it is the biggest exporter of weapons to Myanmar. And Myanmar is China's third largest weapons market in Asia. Since 2013, Yangon has procured 68% of its arms from Beijing. That is about $720 million worth of imports. The items include 17 JF-17 aircraft, 12 Chinese Rainbow UAVs, 2 Type 43 frigates and 76 Type 92 armoured vehicles. Besides providing military hardware, China also has a long history of arming terror groups in Myanmar. In November 2019, the Myanmar army busted a huge cache of weapons from an insurgent group. Most of the weapons seized were Chinese. Then in June 2020, the Thai military seized Chinese-made weapons along Myanmar's border. Most of them were supposed to go to the Arakan Army, an insurgent group which operates in Myanmar. China's influence in Myanmar spreads far and wide, but the world is not paying much attention to this reality. Instead of holding a dialogue with the army generals, the Biden administration has imposed sanctions on the military dispensation.
We will identify at first round of targets this week, and we're also going to impose strong exports controls. We're freezing U.S. assets that benefit the Burmese government while maintaining our support for healthcare, civil society groups, and other areas that benefit the people of Burma directly.
Will the sanctions work, or will they push Myanmar further into China's lap? It's a question the world needs to think hard about before taking action on Myanmar. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
There's another question that's on the mind of everyone. It's about the WHO team's visit to Wuhan. What did it achieve? Where did the virus come from? The investigators don't know. How did it spread worldwide? The investigators don't know. What did they do for a whole month and a whole year before that? The press conference they held in Wuhan left us with more questions than answers. A comprehensive report is awaited. The United States is already saying that it will probe the probe. And now the WHO team itself is divided. There are serious differences among the investigators over China's role in the pandemic. Two of these experts have made public statements and they're worth noting. Listen to this very carefully. First, we have Professor Dominic Dwyer from Australia. He's a microbiologist at a hospital in Sydney. Dwyer was in Wuhan participating in the WHO team's investigation. He has returned to Australia and now he's speaking to the local press. And he's revealing what happened behind the scenes in Wuhan. What did the Chinese state do? He gave an interview to ABC in Australia. There are two disclosures that stand out. One, the WHO team wanted to test old wastewater samples in Wuhan, samples collected before December 2019 for early traces of the Wuhan virus. Well, they couldn't do it. This team, the WHO probe team, was told that the samples have been discarded. How convenient. Revelation number two, the WHO team wanted to look at a blood donation sample from Wuhan. Again, we're talking about samples from before December 2019. They could not test these either, apparently due to some local laws. So here's what has happened. The probe team got no access to samples that they wanted to test. Either the evidence was destroyed or the team was denied access. Now, if you remember the Wuhan press conference, one of the biggest takeaways was this. The probe team could find no evidence of the outbreak in Wuhan before December 2019. But if you consider Professor Dwyer's revelations, the headline should have been this. The probe team found no evidence because they could not conduct a proper investigation. Now let's talk about another team member, Thea Coulson-Fisher, another expert who went to Wuhan for the probe. She says China did not provide raw data. In Wuhan, a reporter asked Fisher if she was happy with the access that China gave them. And Fisher said that her research relied on data, and this data, the one that they got, was analyzed and presented by Chinese experts. The WHO team could not gather data independently in China.
About the transparency, are you happy with what you have been shown here and what you have been gained access to?
Well, if I was to completely answer that question, I would say I could confirm that if I had the raw data in my hands. With the current situation, that has not been the case. I would have to rely on the huge amount of data that has been analyzed and presented to me. But I've not had the raw data, as would be the case in most other countries in the world if you come as an ex-national or an outsider and look at the individual personal identifiable data. You would mostly likely, in most scenarios, get access to aggregated data, as in this case.
Fisher is not the only one raising these concerns. Reports say other team members have privately spoken about uncooperative officials in China and the intense political pressure that this investigation faces. It's bad enough that China hijacked the probe. What I'm about to tell you is worse. China wants to put the US in the dock. They've been at it for a while now. China wants the US to open up its virology labs for an international probe. A sorry attempt at tit for tat. Yesterday, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs held a press conference. They said the WHO investigators must now go to the US.
There have also been a number of reports and studies, we have talked about this many times, suggesting that the outbreak has already appeared in many places around the world as early as second half of 2019. Among these reports is one that suggests that a new coronavirus may have appeared in the US before US officials reported the first confirmed case of COVID-19. We hope that the US, like China, will adopt an open and transparent attitude and invite WHO experts to carry out research and studies in the US.
Do you see China's strategy? First stall the probe, then wash it up at home, and then send the investigators on a wild goose chase around the world. And that's not even the worst part of it. The worst part of China's charade is that the world is putting up with all of this. Back to India and the government standoff with social media giant Twitter. This is over posts and handles that the government of India says pose a security threat. But Twitter refuses to take action against them, citing freedom of expression. The tweets must flow, they say. A government notice says these handles are spreading misinformation about the farmer protest in India. Delhi is drafting new rules to regulate online platforms. At the same time, it is promoting a made-in-India alternative to Twitter.
Sir, हम सोशल मीडिया का बहुत सम्मान करते हैं। सोशल मीडिया ने आम लोगों को एम्पावर किया है। डिजिटल इंडिया प्रोग्राम में सोशल मीडिया का भी बहुत बड़ी भूमिका है। हम आलोचना के भी अधिकार का सम्मान करते हैं। प्रधानमंत्री से लेकर सरकार तक की आप आलोचना कर सकते हैं क्योंकि ये संविधान का अंग है। लेकिन सोशल मीडिया का दुरुपयोग अगर हिंसा, फेक न्यूज, वैमनस्य बढ़ाने के लिए किया जाएगा तो कार्रवाई होगी, ये हम बहुत विनम्रता से कहना चाहते हैं।
The government of India has made its intention absolutely clear. It won't tolerate misinformation and fake news on social media platforms. A message that was mostly aimed at Twitter. Earlier this week, New Delhi issued a notice to the platform directing it to block 1,178 accounts that were provoking sentiments on the internet. The government said most of these accounts belong to Khalistani sympathizers and Pakistan's keyboard warriors. But Twitter has been reluctant in taking action. It has banned only a handful of these handles. As for the rest, Twitter says the tweets must flow. The same position that Twitter took during the Arab Spring. During the Arab Spring demonstrations in Egypt, although those protesters were more active on Facebook. India sees this misinformation as a security threat. The government has ready draft rules to regulate all social media platforms, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and OTT platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime. The new rules will include a code of ethics and regular compliance reports, rules that all platforms will have to abide by. The government will also set up the post of a chief compliance officer, who will respond on a 24/7 basis to any complaints from law enforcement agencies. There will also be a grievance redressal mechanism portal to keep a check on misinformation. And the Information and Broadcasting Secretary will have the powers to take action in case of an emergency. The rules are yet to be finalized. In the meantime, government officials are promoting alternatives to Twitter, like Coup, a made-in-India app that was launched in March 2020. It was the winner of the Art Money Bar app challenge. Although homegrown, the app has a Chinese investor as a small stakeholder. Shinwei Capital, Coup's owner, has announced on Twitter that the Chinese company will fully leave the app soon. But union ministers, chief ministers, government handles, a lot of them have already moved to this Desi app, with this message for Twitter.
वॉशिंगटन के कैपिटल हिल पर जब रैंसैकिंग होती है, पुलिस को कार्रवाई करना पड़ता है, तो कुछ ये माइक्रो ब्लॉगिंग कंपनियां उसके साथ खड़ी हो जाती हैं। और जब यहां पर लाल किले पर हमला होता है, जो भारत की गरिमा का प्रतीक है, तो उसके विरोध में खड़ी हो जाती हैं। ये डबल स्टैंडर्ड नहीं चलेगा। ये सारी कंपनियां जान लें।
But will it be a sustainable platform? Or will its popularity fade as the controversy dies down? Either way, some competition always keeps the market healthy. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
There are some things that appear synonymous, but are actually worlds apart, like what's legal and what's right. And this is not a philosophical inquest. On the contrary, it's a very simple matter. Let me explain with the help of a few court judgments, all from Indian courts in the last couple of weeks. The Bombay High Court dropped the first shocker. It ruled that groping without skin-to-skin contact was not sexual assault. And we're talking about children here, human beings at their most impressionable and vulnerable age. So at what point do undue advances qualify as sexual assault? According to the court, only if the accused disrobes the minor or slides their hand inside the clothes. There is only one way to describe this judgment: a free pass. The courts are basically deciding what constitutes trauma for a child. It shows how outdated the legal definition of sexual assault is. We poured through multiple sources, dictionaries, NGOs, rights organizations, and all of them define sexual assault as unwanted sexual advances. There was nothing about clothes or location or age. The second shocker was dropped by the Punjab and Haryana High Court. It has basically endorsed child marriage. On the 21st of January, a 17-year-old girl married a 36-year-old man. The High Court has upheld their marriage and granted them protection. Why? Because of religion. According to law, the minimum age for marriage is 18 years for girls and 21 years for boys. This is laid down in two separate acts of the Indian Parliament. One is the Special Marriage Act of 1954 and second, the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act of 2006. How then did the court recognize this marriage of a 17-year-old? The girl was Muslim, and the court gave primacy to personal laws. The Muslim personal law says maturity and puberty are one and the same. So if a person has attained puberty, they are free to marry. Now this puts the age of marriage at around 15 years. It's as if the last 150 years of social reforms never happened. And this is not an argument against personal laws in India, though it's high time the country had a uniform civil code. But that's for the Parliament and the people of India to decide together. But when courts uphold personal laws at the expense of children's rights, questions must be asked. Are the laws in tune with modern times? Are the courts interpreting them with a progressive mindset? Remember, most of the laws that we live by were framed decades back. Times have changed. What was considered normal in the past is probably a crime today. So the laws must keep up, which means the lawmakers must keep up. Unfortunately, in most cases, they don't. Let me tell you what's happening in Nepal. The government there is planning to take on human trafficking rings, a noble idea. But wait till you hear their plan. Nepal wants women under the age of 40, to get permission from their guardians before traveling abroad. So when you visit the immigration department, they'll ask you to produce consent forms. Your guardian and even the local ward official must sign off on your travel plans. And this will apply to all women below the age of 40. On social media, Nepalese women have two words for the new law: preposterous and patriarchal. And it's impossible to argue with that. They are preposterous. All three instances we've listed reveal a pattern. A, the system is inherently problematic. Sometimes it's patriarchal, sometimes it's just tone deaf. And B, the people in charge of these systems need a reality check. Their ideas and beliefs need an immediate overhaul. We are talking about seismic changes here. It won't be easy. But then again, change rarely is. When vaccines arrived, countries pumped in millions of dollars to buy enough doses. Rich countries blocked doses by pre-booking them. Pharma companies were more than happy to indulge. For them, it was like a pandemic windfall. But almost 2 months later, reality is hitting hard. The supply chains are too slow. Some countries don't even have the right syringe to extract the vaccine. And a certain Justin Trudeau from Canada, who wanted to wade into the farmer protests in India, has now dialed Prime Minister Narendra Modi, seeking India's help with vaccines.
Last year was a race to find a vaccine. And now that they are here, the world has new problems. In Japan, the government will have to throw away millions of doses. In Canada, they simply don't have enough shots. The problem of plenty in one part of the world, acute shortages elsewhere. Japan finds itself in a helpless situation. It has secured 144 million shots of Pfizer's vaccine, enough for 72 million people. That's assuming each vial contains 6 doses. But extracting that 6th dose is a tricky affair. It requires special dead space syringes with narrow plungers. Japan doesn't have many of those. It uses normal syringes which can only extract 5 doses from a vial. So once the vaccination drive begins, which is later this month, Medics will have to throw away the vials after 5 doses. End result, millions of doses will be wasted. Doses that Canada could really use right now. They've ordered millions of shots from Pfizer and Moderna. But delivery has been slow. Moderna delivers to Canada once every 3 weeks. The next shipment is set to arrive on February 22nd. Canada's vaccination drive is on the verge of stalling. So Prime Minister Justin Trudeau dialed Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He was given an assurance. India would do its best to secure the doses sought by Canada. It's an epic role reversal over 70 years. Here's a picture from 1947. India's first Health Minister, Amrit Kaur, is seen receiving penicillin cases from the Canadian Red Cross Society. Back then, the world community was India's only hope. Today, the world depends on Made in India vaccines. As Japan dumps its vaccine and Canada hunts for it, South Africa is looking for a barter. It says the AstraZeneca jab is ineffective against the new variant, so the rollout has been abandoned. But what will South Africa do with its massive stockpile? 1 million doses have already arrived. 500,000 more are expected soon. The health minister is talking about a swap, exchanging the AstraZeneca doses for those of another firm. And if that doesn't work, maybe sell the entire stock to a willing buyer. Since this whole episode is unprecedented, it's not clear whether the drug makers will agree to either proposal. As for the jab's efficiency, the World Health Organization continues to recommend it even against the new variants.
Even if there is a reduction in the possibility of this vaccine having a full impact in its protection capacity, especially against severe disease, there is no reason not to recommend its use, even in countries that have the circulation of the variants.
The vaccine rollout was always going to be a logistical nightmare. But the lack of global coordination is appalling. Vaccines are going in the bin or sitting idly in refrigerators, even as thousands die from the virus every day. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Meanwhile, Pakistan witnessed protests on Wednesday. Who was protesting? Government employees. Against whom? Prime Minister Imran Khan. What for? To get a pay hike. Islamabad came to a standstill on Wednesday. Hundreds of federal government employees descended on the streets. We are told this has happened for the first time in Pakistan's history. Most of these workers were from lower-level jobs. They said that they were fed up with the income disparities and demanded at least a 40% hike in their salary. What did the government do about it? It approved a 25% hike, but with a caveat. PTI officials say that they will give all increments, keeping in view the economic condition of their country and that of the treasury in the days to come. This promise leaves little to imagination. We all know the economic condition of this country. Also, the promise comes after a lot of chaos. Yesterday, thousands of protesters gathered outside the Pakistan Secretariat, all set to march towards the parliament. But before they could, they were arrested, packed in police vans and sent to jail. Those who remained had to deal with tear gas. There were clashes. At one point, there was so much tear gas in the air that both the protesters and the police had to retract. Our correspondent Anas Malik was there. He sent us this report.
Well, it's absolutely chaotic right now. If you can see right behind me, there's increasing use of the tear gas, and it's all white around where I'm standing. It's increasingly difficult to even breathe. This use of tear gas has been ongoing throughout the day. This is right around the Secretariat and towards Kosar Walk as well, where the Aviation Ministry is housed. The federal government employees have been protesting. They've been demanding an increase, a 40% increase in the pays of them, and they've been demanding that their pay structure should be done as the same as that of the provinces as well. The federal government, the leader of the federal government employees, Rahman Bajo, was arrested last night, and the federal government employees had said that they would be coming out in solidarity with him, demanding his release and demanding an increment as well in their pay. The government has barred that. They said that they wanted to move towards the parliament The government has thwarted that attempt to move towards the parliament. But since then, we've seen increased use of tear gas. I'm sorry. It's increasingly difficult to breathe even and to speak properly.
There was just too much tear gas in the air in Islamabad. But 500 kilometers away in Multan, there was too much cake. And believe me when I say too much. A few days back, Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi inaugurated a road in Multan. You heard that right. A Foreign Minister inaugurated a road. Also, it's not often that Pakistan gets a new road. It called for a celebration, so Mr. Qureshi brought a huge cake along, knifed it, tried to eat it with his mask on, and left the rest for the public. What followed cannot be put into words. They're all definitely voting for Imran Khan, or maybe not. Another video is going viral. It shows a former PTI lawmaker, Ubaid Ullah Mayer, accepting bribes from provincial government officials. This video is from 2018, we must tell you, the year that Imran Khan came to power. The lawmaker in question accepted the bribe, promising to make the men who paid him ministers in Imran Khan's party. Now he has confessed to his crime. The controversy is set to get bigger. Some high-profile names are going to tumble out. We'll keep a cake ready for the Pakistan Prime Minister. We're slipping into a short break. We'll be back with Gravitas Images. Thanks for watching.
WION now available in the United States. Download the app now.